Russell, you live?
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar hosted by Summer School that is based in the Development and Alumni Department at the University of Cape Town. This afternoon, we're looking at the US election 2020, a turning point, but to what? I imagine that other than the global pandemic, the US election is probably getting as much, if not more, attention. We know that the United States goes to the polls on November the 3rd. Of course, we know that early voting has already been taking place. And we're also aware of the fact that this is probably, there's a tendency to say this quite regularly now when US elections take place, that the election is the most significant or most consequential. And so it becomes a little bit of a cliche, but I think that, and our panelists will help us to understand why this particular election can really, with justification, be described as one of the most important elections in the history of the United States. Principally, of course, because of the rise of Trumpism and the presidency of Donald Trump. Now, to try to make sense of this and also to answer some of the questions that people may have about the US election, we have two uniquely placed panelists in Francis Kornegay and John Matisonn. Both are steeped in understanding of the US political system. Both have spent a long time there. John himself has written quite extensively on the US, has been a foreign correspondent for many years, a presenter, appears regularly on television, answering questions about the USA, and has also written a number of books. Incidentally, also, of course, books on South Africa, and many of you will know his work on Cyril Ramaphosa. John is in conversation with Francis Kornegay, who at various stages in his life has been involved in different levels of intimacy with US politics. At one stage in his life was actually a staffer in the US Congress, has also been a fellow at prestigious institutions like the Woodrow Wilson Institute, and also follows US events very, very closely. Now, the election, of course, is significant globally, and we know that because of the importance of the US as the world's leading economy, and of course the influence that the US has on global affairs and the policies, foreign policies, and the impact that it has on many countries. But we're also obviously interested from the perspective of the US citizens themselves who will be participating in this election, and what it will mean to them, as well as what the election will mean globally. And of course, we also always struggle to understand the US electoral system, the fact that you can win the election as a president, even although you don't get the popular vote. And that, as is explained, obviously, in the particular electoral system or structure within the US through the Electoral College, and the importance that different states play in terms of the Electoral College. And so I'm sure that those are questions that will come up, and John and Francis will help us to understand this. Also, during this election, Congress is also in play, Senate, House of Representatives, and that is also a very important part of this election, because as one has seen recently with the confirmation of a Supreme Court justice, the fact that who controls Senate is very, very critical in resolving those kinds of issues. And I'm sure John and Francis will also speak to those issues. So John and Francis, welcome, and we really appreciate you making your expertise available, and we look forward to this conversation. So I'm going to ask John to kick us off for about 15 minutes, and then Francis will respond and make some of his own comments. If there's a need for them to have further exchanges, that will happen. And then we will certainly open the discussion to those of you who have joined, because we really want to hear your voices. We want this to be as interactive as possible, and we really want to try and answer the questions that are uppermost in your minds. So John, over to you.
Thank you, Russell, and hello, Francis, and hello, everybody. I'm going to go through, I want to try to cover quite a lot of ground, so if I leave things unexplained, please ask me at question time. I think, things have changed so much in the last few months. So I'm going to rush into to make some judgments. I think what won't happen, there was talk not that long ago that Trump might try to stage a coup. I don't think that'll happen. I don't think there'll be civil war. States won't secede from the Union. It's also unlikely that any state will misuse the Electoral College seats to try and put in somebody that wasn't voted for, which can technically be done, but is most unlikely. I think it's also unlikely, the other thing people talked about is that if the Electoral College comes in at 269 for Biden and Trump, that it gets thrown to the House of Representatives. I don't think that'll happen either. The fact is, I think that Biden's going to win. And also that although Trump has shown autocratic tendencies, it turns out he's a grossly incompetent manager. He can't keep staff. He can't organize complexity. He doesn't have any generals supporting him. He has little idea how the US government works, and he couldn't even manage his campaign war chest, which he blew early in a way that no experienced campaign manager would have done. And Biden now has a massive cash advantage over him, which he's using very well. I think Trump will do what he's done all his life, is try to use the courts. I think he'll try and encourage his followers to take to the streets. There will be court cases over voter suppression, but the most likely outcome will be a Biden win. Now, how will that happen? It's the evening of the election could well be messy, because the three states that would be definitive, given that we know there are a lot of states that the Democrats will definitely win and a lot of states the Republicans will definitely win. It comes down to, first of all, the three Rust Belt states that Trump snatched from the Democrats last time. That's Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. But in those three, the results are unlikely to come quickly because of their counting rules. So that means that you could expect things to be undecided on the evening. But if Florida goes to Biden early, that would be then I think the commentary will quickly move in the television and so on to the fact that Biden's winning, provided he gets the ones we expect him to get. If he gets Florida, that's fairly decisive, because Biden doesn't need Florida to win. It's a sort of a nice to have, but for Trump, it's pretty essential. It's very hard to see him winning without Florida. The same applies to a couple of the other battleground states like North Carolina, Arizona, and Georgia. If Biden does well in some of those would be very strong signals. So why will Biden win? Actually, the polls have been remarkably stable by historic comparisons. Hillary against Trump 4 years ago was up and down. It was very volatile. She was ahead, she was behind. Biden has actually been ahead by slightly varying margins, but not very much, since the beginning of the year. And according to Nate Cohn of the New York Times, Biden's lead is now bigger than any since 1996. I would have given reasons why the polling errors of 2016 are not that important, but now I think we've sort of overtaken those issues. So I want to move on. Obviously, question me if you think that I shouldn't be taking the polls as seriously as I am. Trump has really run a terrible campaign, and last time he doesn't seem to have grasped the trends that gave him this unique moment of power as a result from the propelled by the unintended victims of globalization. Last time he weaponized their grievances in trade, in the loss of jobs, the rise of the opioid crisis, suicides, all those things, the result of job losses as a result of trade deals and other things and technology changes. But he doesn't seem to have weaponized those this time. And in any event, he's been in office, and the COVID-19 crisis is so terrible, and he's handled it so terribly that all those things have gone against him. Biden, there's no doubt that Biden is doddery. His cognitive decline is obvious. But I learned, Francis and I became friends in the 80s when Ronald Reagan was president. And I remember Ronald Reagan having a press conference where one after another thing he said was wrong. He wasn't as malevolent as Trump, but his mistakes were obvious, and it didn't make any difference. So I think what has mattered in this campaign has been strategic issues. And Biden's campaign, although, as I say, he's not that articulate and he's past his prime, he's been strategically very careful and effective. He has moved to the left as the country's moved to the left. His policies are more left than the Democratic Party has had for a very long time. But he avoided the crucial mistakes, things that could have been weaponized against him. When Medicare for All came up, in other words, eliminating private medical insurance, he rejected that. When people talked about defunding the police, he rejected that. So he avoided those potholes, and Trump's attempts to brand him as a socialist and corrupt really just didn't work. Biden successfully positioned himself as not just the antithesis of Trump, but as the remedy against Trump. So I think Biden wins. I think probably the Democrats will will control of the Senate. We can come back to that if we have time. But I thought what I would do is I want to look a little bit at what happens next, because I want to look at what went wrong, where America went wrong, and I want to focus on two issues over the last 30, 40 years. The one is that the US mishandled its unipolar moment. I went to the University of Chicago where they claim responsibility for something called the realism theory, which said that the Cold War was stable for the world. Of course, we in South Africa don't necessarily see it quite that way, but from the point of view of Europe and much of Asia, they saw it as stable because the Soviets and the Americans didn't go to war. And they said it was stable not because so much of the ideological differences, but because they had equal power. There was a bipolar world, and that brought stability. After 1989, the US we were in a unipolar world because the US was the sole superpower, and I think they mishandled that, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And of course, the realists would probably say that was inevitable because they were too powerful, and that with nobody to check them. But the other thing I want to focus on a little bit is how the idea of freedom, starting especially under Ronald Reagan in 1980, where he equated the idea of freedom with freedom from government. And his famous statement was, the worst 9 words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And that was a way of getting people to agree to reduce taxes, take government less seriously. It's a trend in American politics that goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, who was a very brilliant man, but also had the suspicions of government that were typical of rural slave-owning landowners like Jefferson himself, and were in contrast with the views of someone like Alexander Hamilton, who believed in the power of government to modernize an economy. And so we've reached the apotheosis of that idea of freedom as being equated with freedom from government. Now, freedom in 2020 America has become the right to own automatic weapons with multiple clips and with almost no control, and the right to not wear masks in a pandemic to protect your fellow citizens. This idea of freedom would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic. But in the current global battle of ideas, this idea threatens to undermine the Enlightenment project of democracy and science that built the modern world, and of course has been used by countries as far afield as China and Russia to say that the whole idea of democracy is a bit of a hoax, and that democracies can't handle the problems of government. Of course, that's not true, because many democracies have handled the pandemic well, but America is certainly not one of them. So my view of the mistakes of the unipolar moment go all the way back to the tax cuts and the rise of inequality that really started to become extreme, starting with Ronald Reagan, continued under George W. Bush, and continued even further under Donald Trump. From the 1930s to the 1970s, inequality in America declined. And by the way, at that time, American business people don't like to acknowledge this fact, but it's there for all to see. The US had a marvelous economy in the 50s and before and after that. And what were the tax rates? The top tax rate was something close to 90%. That didn't mean people paid 90, but they were certainly paying 40 or 50. And the economy was very successful. So that rise of taxes and the rise of inequality was the first issue. The second one is Francis and I were in Washington in the end of the Jimmy Carter administration, when he was trying to get America to limit fossil fuel consumption. And of course, Reagan came to power and rejected that. Second thing that matters particularly to someone like me, who was a broadcast regulator here in South Africa, was under Reagan, the whole idea that television had to be fair to both sides in an election, which was embodied in something called the Fairness Doctrine, was removed in 1987 in the time of Reagan. And what that led to, with also the removal of all controls on campaign finance, really meant that the richest people had the best impact and possibility to impact elections. And I think that's a really dangerous move. And of course, it led to the rise of Fox. By the way, for those of you who think about television, you know, Fox in America is owned by the Murdoch Group, and so is Sky in Britain. But they're completely different, because in Britain there is not the Fairness Doctrine, but some equivalent. Whereas in Fox, in America, there isn't. And so you can go on the air, attack the other side, give them no proper time to account for themselves, no accountability to being factually accurate. Then, of course, you had the wars, the endless wars that were started by George W. Bush, which in some ways are more serious for the world even than the Trump presidency. The Iraq War, of course, I think was very damaging, and was still, the whole Middle East has been damaged by it. I worked for the United Nations in Afghanistan. After 9/11, I was against the Iraq War, but I certainly had some sympathy for the Afghan War. Because 9/11 had been planned by bin Laden in Afghanistan. But in fact, now with hindsight, after the time I spent in Afghanistan, I don't even believe that. We don't have time to explain why, but it was so badly mishandled. It's been going on for nearly 20 years with no end in sight. And I had colleagues in the UN who died there, and I'm hard put to be able to say that their death was in a good cause, that war was really worthwhile. Then, of course, the global financial crisis never held people fully accountable. In 2013, the Supreme Court basically gutted the Voting Rights Act, and of course it stopped states with a history of voter suppression from changing their election laws without federal government approval. And of course, we've seen record voter suppression this year as a result of that decision. And then, of course, in 2010, there was a court case of the Supreme Court called Citizens United, which also removed most remaining barriers to unlimited use of campaign funding by individuals. And then, of course, we've had COVID-19, which is shockingly being handled by the Anglo-Saxon countries, especially. I'm referring particularly to America and also to the UK. So if Biden wins, I would say a huge amount depends on his cabinet appointments. Some of you may remember a book by David Halberstam called The Best and the Brightest, which talked about John Kennedy's rise to power and his decision. When people thought when he became president he was going to bring fresh blood and change things, and only to find in The Best and Brightest that a lot of the old establishment were appointed. I think it would be unfortunate if Biden appoints people who've been on the hawks who've been in the lobbyist revolving door between the State Department, Defense Department, and lobbying jobs, because there needs to be a change in its foreign policy that really brings us up to date with the modern world. And I also think it's going to be important to see who he appoints at Treasury, whether it'll be yet another person from Goldman Sachs or somebody else. Now, as far as the Senate is concerned, I think the Democrats are likely to win the Senate. I think I'm running a little low on time, so I'm going to speed it up and not explain which ones and what, unless you ask me to. But I do think that the Democrats are going to, when they come to power, they are going to be probably tougher than Obama was. If you remember when Obama took office, he really thought he could bring reconciliation and cooperation between the Democrats and Republicans. But as you know, Mitch McConnell, the head of the Republicans in the Senate, set his goal as being making Obama a one-term president. And that I think that people, including Obama and Biden, now regret that they didn't fight harder, and that probably means they will abolish the filibuster, which will enable them to get their agenda done more quickly. I think there'll be big changes. Obviously, Biden will restore relations with the allies, with the multilateral institutions, the UN, the World Health Organization. Those are things that are all good for South Africa, because the multilateral institutions, by the way, are filled with flaws. I know I was in the UN, but as people who are in the UN say, having looked at all the things wrong with it, if it didn't exist, you'd have to invent it. And it does give South Africa a seat at the table. The G20 also was a body that has become less relevant under Trump, but under Biden would become more relevant. And of course, we sit there. So I think I better wrap up because we don't have a lot of time, but I will just say I think that this is a turning point. It has implications for the whole world. A lot of it's not yet clear. There will be an ideological realignment in the United States, but I think the two-party system will remain. I don't think the Republicans will collapse. I think what will happen is over time, there will be perhaps a fairly significant ideological adjustment, not to the left, but in different directions. The issues of free trade will be re-examined and some things like that. But the two-party system will remain in America. What else did I want to say? It may take a little time. Trump will try and still exert authority, but he'll also be facing a lot of court cases, much as Jacob Zuma has done here. I think I'll stop there and hand over to Francis.
Thank you so much, John. And that's a very nice way to kick off and a nice overview. Francis, I'm sure you're going to respond to a lot of that, but one of the things I'd really like you to talk to is whether you share John's positive outlook that Trump will not have a second term, and why will Biden be successful where Hillary Clinton was not? You got to unmute yourself. You got to unmute yourself. One of the new buzzwords of Corona is to mute or to unmute. You've got to unmute yourself, Francis.
Ah, there we are.
No, you're still talking to yourself.
He unmuted. There we are.
You're still talking to yourself, Francis.
There we are.
Which is one of the common features of Trump. So, yeah. Are you unmuted? No, not yet. Not yet.
It keeps.
There we are.
It keeps.
There we are. There we are.
Okay. Well, if it will stay that way. Okay. Yeah. Well, I more or less agree with John's assessment, but given the chaos that Trump has generated and his attempts to delegitimize much of the system, there's a lot of hedging going on whether or not Biden and Harris will prevail in the end. The thing is that if Biden and Harris are successful next week, they're going to have to move very fast in the first year of the term to really hit the ground running in bringing about major reforms. Now John mentioned getting rid of the filibuster. That seems to be very high on the agenda of Democrats, because if they're going to get it, well, first of all, they're going to have to hopefully gain control of the Senate. So we're assuming that that happens. If that happens, then they're going to have to get rid of the filibuster so that they can push through major reforms. I mean, Biden is going to have to set up something like what Franklin Roosevelt set up in the Federal Relief Administration in order to get firm control over the coronavirus process, because right now there's just total disarray in coping with that, and that in turn affects the economy, and that means that Biden is going to have to come up with some New Deal type scale programs of infrastructure development, really getting people to work and getting in train, recovery from people who have lost their jobs, have lost businesses, and so forth. And that is going to be accompanied by re-engaging globally with that means rejoining the World Health Organization, for example, the climate the Climate Accord, trying to kickstart the Iran nuclear deal, which is going to be complicated, and that just brings up a whole host of complexities that go back at least as far as to the ending of the Cold War, which one observation I think that needs to be made on that is that while the Cold War ended, the East-West fault line in international relations did not end. We still have an East-West dynamic. And my concern about Biden's foreign policy is that if it's going to be the traditional alliance restoration and so forth, now that is something that needs to be attended to. But the U.S. and the West are going to have to reach out to organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the main trans-Eurasian multilateral platform, which is going to have to be engaged if you're going to set up a new framework for resolving some of the crises, the global crises that the U.S. needs to try to disengage from, but disengage from in a way that stabilizes, rather than the direction that you have with Trump, which has basically been to knit together an autocratic alliance of Netanyahu's Israel with Saudi Arabia and UAE and Egypt. And I might add that has a major impact on Africa. If you look at what is going on in Northeast Africa, in the Horn of Africa right now, forcing Sudan into normalizing with Israel, coupled with Trump deciding to cut aid to Ethiopia because of Ethiopia is not agreeing to the terms that Egypt wants it to with regard to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Those are a whole set of dynamics in terms of foreign policy that are going to have to be engaged so that the U.S. eventually is able to reposition itself globally so that it can concentrate on domestic renewal. Because the U.S. is going to have to, in terms of budgeting, for example, how is the U.S. going to recover from the coronavirus, which is going to take trillions of dollars, but at the same time maintain an over budgeted military establishment? So, reining in the defense budget, along with abolishing the tax cuts, are major domestic issues that are going to have to be engaged if the U.S. under Biden is going to make any major headway in recovery. And this has to take into consideration the major demographic changes that are underway in the U.S., which really has a lot to do with why the country has become so polarized, in the sense that the election of Obama in 2008 struck fear into the Republican Party's base, having to do with the fact that the voting base of the Republican Party is shrinking. It's aging and shrinking. And this has motivated them to throw up all sorts of voter suppression initiatives in terms of reducing access to voting, stacking the judiciary branch at various levels, not just at the Supreme Court level, but at the appeals level, so as to slow up the demographic realignment that is underway. And you see this in some of the polling results with early election, the early voting. I mean, some states that you would never think would be in play, like Texas, for example, are in play. Trump and Biden are virtually tied in Texas right now, and of course Florida is the battleground in the Sun Belt when it comes around to that, and along with Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia. If Biden is able to prevail in any of those states, let's say Florida, Arizona, and either Georgia and or North Carolina, that virtually, potentially at least, obliterates the Southern strategy that came into being when Nixon won the White House in 1969. So what you're looking at are potentially revolutionary changes in terms of the political landscape. But that is, and in reaction to that, the Republican Party has basically become a fringe. It has taken on a fringe character of a far right white Christian fundamentalist movement. Now, that I think challenges the possibility of sustaining a two-party system in the conventional sense, because if the Republican Party is not able to recenter itself into becoming center right rather than far right, then the future of the Republican Party is pretty much at stake. And I think that's why there are so many Republicans from the Republican establishment who have actually come out in opposition to Trump, like with the Lincoln Project, and a number of Republicans who have decided that in order to restore the Republican Party, they're going to have to elect. They're going to have to support the election of Biden. Then the battle will be on between the far right and the more establishment center right. But Biden and the Democratic Party are going to have to also look at how to rebalance the system in terms of the Electoral College and the Supreme Court. My sense is that if Biden and Harris are going to get their agenda underway, they're going to have to do more than get rid of the filibuster. They will probably have to expand the Supreme Court. They will have to do that. There will also have to be a campaign within and outside the Democratic Party to rein in the Electoral College, the popular vote, the Electoral College popular vote compact, which is a movement underway to do just that. They're going to have to bring the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico and possibly, one or two other territories into statehood. Because the problem with the Senate is that no matter how populous a state is, all states get only 2 senators. So the thing is that the system, based on the way the founders set up the Constitution, the system is virtually rigged against progressive democratic balance of forces. And the interesting thing on this is that when Mitt Romney mentioned that he was going to support the Supreme Court nominee of Amy Barrett, he made this comment that was very interesting. He said, "Well, you know, the U.S. is a center-right country." Now, that really is not true. The U.S. is artificially center-right because of the way the electoral system and the Constitution are structured. The populace, the majority in the U.S. is well to the left of the Democratic Party, but because of the Electoral College, because of the limitations in the Senate, the conservative right-wing tendencies in the U.S. always have the upper hand, to the point where Democrats almost have to always have a supermajority, not just within the Congress, but even in elections, in order to prevail. So I think with that all over the place commentary, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Francis. No, it was good to just hear your reflections, and it's very wide ranging. But let's try and hone in on the issue of the election now, because a lot of what you are saying and what John also said earlier is premised on a Biden victory, and one of the things one of the lessons of 2016 is the dangers of that kind of in that particular election was perhaps a underestimation of what was actually happening, particularly in these so-called Rust Belt states or Middle America, and the backlash that you referred to the Obama era. Two of the things, or 3 things within the Trump presidency that sort of resonated, and still, of course, was Trump's claims, and one has to unpack that, of having created this incredible economy, okay, and often in American elections, it's always they're saying it's about the economy, stupid, right? So, how much of that will still be a factor, and to what extent was that Trump rhetoric did match reality, and that there is this concern about what a Biden economy will look like. So that was the one issue. The other thing, of course, is the so-called culture wars, and we've seen that in the Supreme Court now playing itself out, and some other culture wars, which taps into a very strong tradition of conservatism within America, notwithstanding what you said, Francis, about the country not necessarily being center-right. The law and order issue, which is what Trump is also playing up. Remember, in the last election, what was so popular was, of course, his anti-immigration stance, right? So, is there a danger of underestimating how strongly these factors may still feature, and could result in an upset again, which people are not really preparing for? So, John, let's start with you.
Yes, well, there's no doubt that this time the Democrats remain spooked. They talk about Trump as the zombie candidate. No matter how much he does wrong, he still seems to get up again. And of course, what is really extraordinary, when you think of what's gone wrong in his presidency, it's really incomprehensible that his polling, although it never reached 50%, he is probably the least popular president in living memory. But on the other hand, he's always kept it stable above 35%. Most other presidents that get things wrong, at least at some stage, drop below that. So that's all true. But a couple of points. First of all, let me talk about the polls. First of all, Biden's polls are better than Hillary's. Secondly, Hillary's polls 4 years ago weren't as wrong as people said. If you bear in mind that Trump won the election in 2016 on the back of 77,000 votes in 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, you can really correctly attribute her loss or Trump's win to any of a number of factors. If Jim Comey, the head of the FBI, hadn't spoken out against Hillary just before the election, or if the Russians hadn't interfered to the degree they did, or if Hillary had been a better candidate, frankly. I mean, she was a uniquely unpopular Democratic candidate. And she also, her campaign was not a good campaign. Her campaign people never sent her to those 3 states because they thought they were safe, that it was a blue wall. And they fundamentally misjudged the electorate. So if any one of those things had gone slightly differently, we'd have had Hillary Clinton as president. The next point is that the opinion polls have all recognized the one error that they did make. They underweighted white, non-college educated voters, and they've all corrected for that. So there's every reason to believe that that Biden is going to win, and that just because they were slightly out. I mean, if you remember, she won by 3 million popular votes last time, and the percentage she won by was not that far from what the national polls said. The state polls were more inaccurate than the national polls. But the fact is that to say the polls were all wrong, I think it's the danger of generals. They all fight the last war. So everybody thinks that 2020 is 2016. 2020 is 2020. We'll make all our own mistakes in 2020. But I do think that by and large, those fears are being exaggerated.
Thanks, John. Francis, do you want to come in and comment on whether the economy is going to, where COVID will be a bigger factor than the economy that Trump claims he built?
Well, one of the things that I've been glad to see happen recently is that there have been some corrections on this idea of Trump's economy. Now, Obama himself, as he's been brainstorming in support of Biden, has put in clear perspective where Trump's economy comes from, and this is none too soon, because I think one of the problems that the Democrats have, and this is a problem of their own making, is that Democrats tend to be not very good at messaging and in terms of what I would call the information war. And you particularly see this on the economy. The reflection in polls in which people seem to favor Republicans when it comes around to the economy. Now, the fact is that just to give you a little bit of historical perspective on it, when Bill Clinton, when his administration ended, he handed over a vibrant, strong economy to his successor, George W. Bush. Now, when Bush's term ended, the U.S. and the world and the global economy were in an economic crisis. And Obama had to come in. Obama and Biden had to come in and redress and restore that with a major stimulus. And it is the stimulus set in train by Obama and Biden that has become the economy that that Trump is talking about. However, the unfortunate thing about that is that Obama was not able to have the magnitude of stimulus that he wanted because of the the Senate and Senate Republicans. They undermine Obama's stimulus agenda all along the way. So the thing is that there was a recovery from the Great Recession, but it was nowhere near what it could have been. But when Trump came in, he had Obama provided him with a strong economy. So now it so happens, fortunately, that these are some points that are beginning to show up. But the economy, the health of the economy, and the coronavirus are interlinked. There's no way that the U.S. is going to have a restoration of its economic health without getting control of the coronavirus, which I mean, Trump and his his new guru Atlas basically want herd immunity. So anyway, but I think that but still we have to be careful though. I am somewhat hedging on the outcome of the election. I mean, Biden and Harris should win based on what we're seeing, but voter suppression activities and so forth, we don't know what impact that's going to have.
Okay, thanks, Francis. I'm mindful of how quickly the time has gone. So let me ask you some quick questions, and just if you can just limit it to just a few words so that we can respond to as many of the questions that came through on the chat line. So one is about the role of the media, and whether the fact that the last time as well, the so-called mainstream media underestimated Trump, but more importantly, underestimated what was actually happening on the ground. Is this something that we need to be looking out for as well in this election? We'll start with you, John.
Well, I must say I do have a longer version, which we don't have time for now, of my criticisms of the American media last time and this time. But overall, we don't know, but we're just not seeing it. Only, I don't know if you saw, there was a poll out today that gave Biden Wisconsin by 17%. Now, that's obviously a huge
17%.
17%. I think that was the Washington Post ABC poll. Now, let's assume that's an outlier, and that's not exactly accurate, of course. But the fact is, we're just not seeing a great drive towards Trump, in part because COVID-19 is the dominant thing in this election. And, you're seeing this massive surge in COVID-19 cases as we move up to the election date, while Trump's people have been infected, Vice President Pence's people are being infected, and every event they have, you see an outbreak of more infections a few weeks later. So I just don't think the media issue is the critical one now.
Francis, just to speak directly to the issue of COVID, it is true that the rates of infection have gone up, but the rates of mortality have gone down. And one of the explanations, of course, is that COVID is now affecting younger people, and therefore the rates of mortality are not as severe as it was in the early stages when it was more the elderly. And therefore the kind of alarm is not at the same level. And one is seeing that in the Trump rallies. Part of it is of course the denial, but part of it is also this I suppose people are just tired and want to get back to their so-called normal lives, right? So what can one read into these sort of Trump rallies that seem to have so many people there, so much energy? And is that perhaps why you are hedging?
Well, I'm hedging mainly because of the fact that I think we can't be complacent about what's going to happen, and we don't want to get mired in wishful thinking. But these rallies that you're talking about, that we're looking at, are actually super spreaders. There are coronavirus cases coming out of those rallies.
But they don't seem to care, Francis. They don't seem to care. They don't seem to care.
Yeah, but well, no, they don't. You're right on that. They don't care. But I would say that when you look at the death rate, the idea that it may be coming down is a bit of cold comfort when you look at the fact that you've got, at the latest count, you've got 226,000 deaths. And I mean, the death rate is, I don't know how one judges, its rate of decline, but it is still unfolding, and you have a new surge. You have a new surge of infections, particularly across the northern Great Lakes Rust Belt in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is under pressure. Minnesota, further out west, North Dakota. I mean, the thing is that you have a surge going on now in the pandemic, and when the U.S. has never really gotten out of the first wave. Yeah. So, and you've got Europe going into its second wave. So I don't. Now, obviously, Trump and his base, I mean, they don't care, and they're not going to be persuaded as far as they're concerned. But one of the tactical mistakes that they've just made is Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, basically signaled surrender. So they say we cannot control the virus. So yes. That so I think that on base the coronavirus is probably the number one issue, although there are others, but I think that's basically what we're looking at.
Okay, we actually have a few minutes to conclude, so let me just thank both of you again. Let me thank the audience who've been on the call and thank them for their questions. I hope that most of their questions were addressed. Some of them not necessarily directly, but in the comments that you made. So I'm going to ask you each now for 1 minute is just to share your last thoughts on how you see the night of November the 3rd and the morning thereafter. I'll start with John.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to run through several very quick points. First of all, it's true that the death rate has declined, but we're still looking at something like 800 a day dying, and that's likely to go up with this current surge. So that's still a lot of people, and the death, that's not incidental. Secondly, I saw a question about the Senate, which Senate seats do I think will go to the Democrats. I think Arizona, very obviously, probably also Colorado, perhaps Maine and North Carolina. And there are a couple of others that are so close that it's likely that at least one of them will go. Of course, on the other side, Democrats are likely to lose one in Alabama. Finally, on the night, I mentioned it earlier, it's very difficult to judge what will happen on the night because a lot depends on when people are able to declare a state. And the key Rust Belt states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, only start a lot of their count very late. So they're unlikely to call. So it really just depends on whether something goes to Biden like Florida quickly, because I think that would be a game changer. But absent that, you could have several days of uncertainty.
Okay, so we have to watch Florida very closely. That could be the game changer, as you said. Huh?
Game changer for Biden. He doesn't have to get it, but if he gets it, it means he's very, very strong.
And for Trump, what would be the game changer? If he were to win something, what would that signal for the Biden possible victory?
Well, for Trump to win, he would need to win something like Pennsylvania or one of these other states, and that's most unlikely.
Okay, Francis, your last thoughts.
Well, okay. Well, I just want to reinforce Florida. I think that Florida will tell us whether we're in for a first round knockout or if we're going to go the distance.
So it's a bellwether state, yeah. It's a bellwether state.
Yeah, but other southern states that could also give us an indication is Georgia and or North Carolina. Because if Trump cannot, now Trump really ought to take both of those states, and he has the advantage in Florida, even though Biden has been ahead. But those are I think our first indication of how the election is going to go is going to be in the South, and once we see that, then we'll know whether we're in for several days before we know anything, or whether things will become clear fairly soon. So we'll see.
Final question to you, John. Is this going to be settled by the ballot box or by the courts?
Well, that depends. I think if the results are looking clear, like in Florida, then I think the courts probably become less important. There'll be attempts, but they'll become less important. The longer it drags on, the bigger is the risk that the courts do intervene.
And you, Francis?
Well, I would agree with that. I think that, I mean, Trump certainly hopes that the courts will get involved, though even that's unpredictable. But I think it depends on how clear the outcome of the election, comes, how quickly or how long drawn out. It's hard to tell at this point.
Okay, so thank you both again. We'll be obviously watching this very closely. We'll be watching Florida with a lot of interest. And this election, of course, has huge consequences, not just for the US globally, and also as consequences for us here in South Africa. So thank you for sharing your insights and your expertise, and goodbye to everyone, and please keep safe. We're going through our own surge, so we should not become complacent, and we should try and remain as safe as we can. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
We'll be in touch, John.
Yeah, definitely.
Good seeing you.
Yeah, you too, Francis. Take care.